It all started with a simple plastic storage bin. It was one of those gray, anonymous-looking things you can buy at any big box store. I first noticed it tucked away in the back of our shared hallway closet, behind the vacuum cleaner and a stack of old board games. My roommate Mark was a quiet guy, kept to himself, never shared much. We had an unspoken agreement about shared spaces, and this closet was one of them. The bin was on his side. One afternoon I bumped into it while looking for a spare light bulb. It was heavier than I expected, and it made a dull, clanking sound. I tried to lift the lid, but it was locked with a small, shiny padlock. What could be so important inside a plastic bin that it needed to be locked? Mark wasn't the type to own valuables. His room was sparse, almost like a hotel room. The bin became a small, persistent mystery in the back of my mind. Mark worked odd hours, sometimes leaving late at night and returning in the early morning. He was intensely private about his life before we became roommates. The locked box just seemed to fit this pattern of secrecy. I decided it was best to just leave it alone. Still, the image of that little padlock stuck with me, a small metallic question mark in our quiet apartment. Our apartment was on the third floor of a rather unremarkable building. The walls were thin, and the hum of the city was a constant backdrop. I worked a standard 9-to-5 job. Mark's schedule was a chaotic puzzle. He claimed to do freelance graphic design, often awake at 3 in the morning. We were polite but distant, two people sharing a lease, not a life. Our conversations were brief and functional. Morning. Did the post arrive? We're out of milk. It was comfortable in its way. Then, one night, sirens shattered the routine. Not the usual distant wail, but a piercing scream right outside our window. I looked out to see flashing red and blue lights, and a column of thick black smoke a few blocks away. Mark was home, standing by the window, watching the scene with unnerving stillness. I said, "Wow, that looks serious. I hope everyone's okay." He just nodded, eyes fixed on the smoke, his face illuminated by the strobing lights. There was an intensity in his gaze that I found strange. At the time, I brushed it off as just his odd way of processing things. I had no idea I was watching a painter admiring his own work. The first fire was at a small, abandoned warehouse. The fire department called it accidental, vagrants, faulty wiring, old chemicals. But a week later, it happened again. A dumpster behind a strip mall, flames high enough to scorch a laundromat. Sirens became a recurring feature of our nights. Fire investigators started to take a closer look. 2 fires, same area, late at night. They began to suspect arson. At the second scene, they found traces of an accelerant. Someone was deliberately setting these fires. The news reports changed. Arsonist. Serial. The fires grew bolder. A small business, then a construction site. Each fire was bigger, more audacious. The police and fire departments formed a joint task force. I read these articles on my phone, sometimes just a few feet away from Mark. One evening, a news report showed a map of the fires, our building almost at the center. Mark glanced at the screen and said, "Crazy, isn't it? Some sick person out there." He sounded so normal, so detached, and went to the kitchen, leaving me staring at the ominous map. Looking back, the signs were all there, scattered like breadcrumbs. But in the moment, they were just isolated oddities. There was the faint, chemical smell in the hallway after Mark had been out. I asked once. He said he'd spilled turpentine while cleaning his brushes. He was a graphic designer. Artists use strange chemicals. I'd see unfamiliar plastic bottles in the recycling bin, labels peeled off. I never paid them much mind. I was determined to be a good, respectful roommate, so I avoided being nosy. Mark's late-night excursions became more frequent as the fires continued. I'd hear the front door click shut long after midnight, then again before dawn. In the morning he looked exhausted but strangely energized. If I asked, he'd say he couldn't sleep or was working at a cafe. The most obvious clue was the gasoline. A small, dark stain on the carpet near the closet, with a distinct smell. I confronted him. He claimed his car had a leak and he'd tracked it inside. He cleaned it up immediately. I accepted his apology, relieved he was taking responsibility. It never occurred to me to ask why he had gasoline on his shoes in the first place. While I was oblivious, the arson task force was piecing together the puzzle. At each fire scene, they collected samples, identifying a unique blend of chemicals. They checked sales records from hardware stores and online retailers, looking for anyone buying those chemicals in unusual quantities. It was a digital manhunt, cross-referencing purchases with other data. The breakthrough came from surveillance footage. A figure in a hoodie, face obscured, getting into a nondescript sedan. They enhanced the video, got a partial license plate and narrowed it down. By cross-referencing vehicles and chemical purchases, they found a match. Mark. His car matched the plate and his credit card had bought the chemicals. Suddenly, they had a name, a face, and an address, their prime suspect. The knock came on a Tuesday evening. A loud, firm, authoritative rap. I was in the living room. Mark was in his room. I opened the door to two police detectives in plain clothes. They asked if Mark was home. I said yes. As I walked toward Mark's room, more officers appeared in the hallway. I knocked. "Mark, the police are here. They want to talk to you." He opened the door, face confused, eyes darting nervously. The detectives presented a search warrant. Officers began searching the apartment, professional and methodical. One detective headed straight for the hallway closet, pushed aside the vacuum, and pulled out the gray plastic bin. "This is locked," he called out. He turned to Mark. "Do you have the key?" Mark shook his head. The detective took out bolt cutters and snapped the padlock with a loud crack. The sound echoed in the silent apartment. I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. What could Mark have possibly done? The detective lifted the lid, and the mystery was solved in the most horrifying way possible. Inside was the arsonist's complete toolkit. Inside the bin were bottles of chemicals, rags, matches, lighters, timers, and electronic components, a mobile laboratory for destruction. The chemical smell was overpowering. In Mark's bedroom, they found a backpack matching the one from the surveillance video. Inside, a dark hoodie, gloves, and a map of the neighborhood with fire sites circled in red. On his laptop, research on accelerants, fire behavior, and news articles about his own crimes. He had been documenting his work. I answered the detective's questions, my voice shaking. I told him about the late nights, the strange smells, the locked box. Each detail now felt like a colossal failure of observation. The evidence was overwhelming. As they led Mark out in handcuffs, he looked at me. No apology, no remorse, just a blank, empty expression. I realized I had shared a home with a stranger. The door closed behind him, and I was left alone in the deafening silence. The police cleared me of any involvement quickly. My work schedule, phone records, and lack of chemical knowledge made it obvious I was just the oblivious roommate. The detectives were sympathetic, but their words offered little comfort. I spent the next few days in a daze, staying with a friend. Every corner of the apartment now felt contaminated. The hallway closet, the spot on the carpet, the kitchen, it was all tainted by the truth of who Mark was. The media descended on our building. Our apartment became a local news story. My name was kept out, but seeing my front door on TV was surreal. Eventually, I had to go back to pack my things. I couldn't live there anymore. The place was no longer a home, it was a crime scene. Mark hadn't just stored his tools in our closet, he'd stored his darkness in my life. The betrayal felt intensely personal, even though I barely knew him. Mark confessed to everything. His motive? He just liked to watch things burn. There was no grand plan, just the thrill. He was sentenced to a long prison term. The fires stopped. The neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief. But for me, the feeling of safety was gone. It's been a few years since that night. I live in a different apartment now, with a new roommate I actually know. But the experience with Mark left a permanent mark. I'm more cautious, more observant, maybe a little more suspicious. Sometimes I think about the red flags I missed, the locked bin, the chemical smells, the late-night walks. They seem so obvious in hindsight. But life isn't a story. We don't have an omniscient narrator. We want to believe the best in people, or at least that they're ordinary. The most disturbing part is how easy it is to live alongside darkness without ever seeing it. We build our lives on trust, assuming secrets are ordinary. Mark's secret was extraordinary, but his ability to hide it was terrifyingly common. The line between normal and monstrous can be as thin as a bedroom wall, as ordinary as a plastic storage bin. You can be standing right next to the fire and still not see the flames.